invitation hymn will be 633. 633 will be an invitation.
Scripture reading this morning is from Hebrews, the 10th chapter, verses 19 through 26. Hebrews 10, verses 19 through 26. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. And having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having a heart sprinkled with the evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins.
So we'll get started in the meantime while we're waiting for that. So this morning we're going to talk about force of habit. Now, I came up with this idea, it was during the gospel meeting. The way they had it was the song leader would give the announcements, and the song service was the same as we do in Sunday evening, 4 songs. So Jim said, do the announcements first. So, okay, good to go. And what did I do? I forgot. All right, and I told him, and I gave the announcements at the end, because in Sunday evening I said, well, I guess force of habit was that it was then. So I was like, maybe I can stretch a sermon in there somehow. So we'll see how it goes. And I don't know if you ever watched the movie, what is it, Mom's favorite movie, Mom's favorite movie, she likes Gone with the Wind. Wizard of Oz, where they say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, pay no attention to the man behind the outlandish tie. So if I'm bad, just remember he wore a pretty cool tie. All right, so we'll start here with a little bit. Force of habit is what they call in English term as an idiom. Now, what's an idiom? An idiom is an expression that doesn't necessarily have a definition in and of itself, but more of an understanding behind it. Some examples of that are wet behind the ears, keep tabs on, and one I use a lot is par for the course, even though I don't play golf. Par for the course, that's an idiom. Now, some definitions that I ran across for this idiom of force of habit is behavior made involuntary or automatic by repeated practice. Behavior occurring without thought and by virtue of constant repetition. Without thinking, because you always do a particular thing, and when you do something involuntarily, without thinking, because you are so used to doing it. All right, so a habit basically is something done as second nature, if you will. Okay, now Obviously, developing a habit can be both good and bad. Now, I wanted to see what I could find as far as quotes about habits. I got a few of them here. 99% of the failures come up from people who have the habit of making excuses. This is by George Washington Carver. One of the greatest football coaches of all times, Vince Lombardi, says, winning is not something, a sometime thing. It's an all-the-time thing. You don't win once in a while. You don't do things right once in a while. You do them all the time. Winning is a habit. St. Augustine said, habit, if not resisted, soon becomes necessity. This is kind of talking about bad habits. Okay? Unless we form the habit of going to the Bible in bright moments as well as in trouble, we cannot fully respond to its consolations because we lack equilibrium between light and darkness. This was by Helen Keller. I thought it was pretty interesting. And the last one I have, I got a couple more. Moral excellence comes about as a result of habit. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts, and that was from Aristotle. Just a couple more. Vince Lombardi again, once you learn to quit, it becomes a habit. The only two things I ever quit in my life was 7th grade basketball and physics 151. So thankfully that hasn't become a habit for me. And the last one here is people start doing things for one reason and continue them for another, and that was Jeannie. So she's going to get me for that one. So I thought that was pretty good. Now let's talk a little bit about bad habits. Some bad habits only affect oneself. Not wearing a seatbelt. I keep getting after my brother for this all the time. He does not wear a seatbelt, and the knucklehead doesn't wear a helmet when he rides a motorcycle. That's a bad habit that can affect yourself. Okay? Eating unhealthy foods. Okay? I do that from time to time, not all the time, but eating healthy foods is a bad habit that it can affect yourself. Tobacco use, alcohol use, drug use, and gambling is a bad habit that can affect yourself. Now, some bad habits affect others. Distracted driving. Getting on your phone, looking to see what's going on. Not using your turn signal. This is a pet peeve of mine. Okay? Not using your doggone turn signal can affect others. And tobacco use, alcohol use, drug use, and gambling can affect others too, if it's your family, right? Some bad habits can affect our eternal salvation. Putting other things before God. This morning before we were getting ready to leave the house, my neighbor was out doing something in his yard. That is putting something else before God. It's not Clement today, but a lot of times I drive down here from Westfield area, and there's a golf course over there. Why anybody would want to waste time on a golf course is beyond me, but a lot of people put that in front of others. And they say, well, you put wrestling, but wrestling's important, okay? Cursing, foul language, is something that is a bad habit. Some people can't open their mouth without swear words coming out of their mouth. That's a bad habit, and that can affect your eternal salvation. Habitual sinning, which is the latter part of what Alan read, was if we go on sinning, okay? You can't say, Lord, forgive me for this, and then go back and do it again. That's habitual sinning, and that is a habit that can affect your eternal salvation. Now let's talk a little bit about good habits. Now there are secular good habits, such as safe and alert driving. I'm sure our lieutenant back there would appreciate safe and alert driving. Okay? Being a good steward of one's finances. If you missed the Josh Welch gospel meeting we had, he had one night talking about being a good steward of our finances. Punctuality, that is another pet peeve of mine. If you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. Okay, that's a good habit. People like that. Dependability, that's another good habit one can have. Okay, now let's look at some godly good habits. Praying regularly. I'm not so good at this, and I need to get better. Reading one's Bible. How do we know what God wants us to be if we don't read the Bible? And plus, it also helps us when we talk to others about Jesus, rather than, oh yeah, I know there's something in there about it, but I can't remember exactly. Okay? And not swearing is a good habit. Speaking and treating others kindly. It's another thing that I need to work on, is I sometimes am this one, negative. Okay? We should try to have a goodly God habit of treating people nicely and talking to them kindly. And talking to people about Jesus daily. Jesus tells us in Matthew, at the end of Matthew, he says, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Wasn't a suggestion. Now, he was obviously talking to his apostles at the time, but it translates to us. We are to go into all the world and preach the gospel. It's not a suggestion. It's not a something, oh, you can do it if you want to. It's a commandment. Now, I looked at some biblical examples of habits and customs. By the way, custom, one of the definitions of that, or synonyms of that actually, is a habit. So habit and customs can be synonymous. In Leviticus 18, in verses 29 and 30, for whoever does any of these abominations, those people who do so shall be cut off from all the people. So you are to keep your commitment to me, not to practice any of the abominable customs or habits which you have practiced before me, so that you do not defile yourself with them. I am the Lord your God. In 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 8 says, they also followed the customs, habits, of the nations whom the Lord had driven out from the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel, which they had introduced. Now, a long read here on Daniel chapter 6. Daniel is one of my favorite people in the Old Testament. Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 to 11. It reads, then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who offers a prayer to any god or person besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it will not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Thereupon King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Now when Daniel learned that the document was signed, he entered his house, and in his roof chamber he had windows, opened them toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and offering praise before his God, just as he'd been doing previously. This was a habit that Daniel had of praying 3 times to his Lord and God. And I find it interesting that once he learned about this, he still did it. He had a habit of doing something, of praying to his Lord, and it didn't matter what the consequences would be. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 16, and he, being Jesus, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as it was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. Jesus had a habit of entering the synagogue and reading the scriptures. Also in Luke, but in chapter 22 rather, and he came out and went, as was his habit, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. Now when he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you do not come into temptation." In the book of Acts, Luke tells us in chapter 9 that now in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which when translated means Dorcas. This woman was excelling in acts of kindness and charity, which she did habitually. But it happened at the time that she became sick and died, and when they washed her body, they laid it in the upstairs room. She had a habit of being kind and charitable. It was a habit that she had. Acts chapter 17, it tells us that now when they traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews, and according to Paul's custom, he visited them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus, who I am proclaiming to you, is the Christ." Paul had a custom. Paul had a habit of doing this. The Bible tells us that habits are good. A lot of times when we think of the word of habit, we think of it in a bad way, but they don't always have to be that way. Now, establishing a good habit. Nothing good happens on its own. It doesn't take any thought or effort to develop a bad habit, right? But if anything is good, it takes effort, it takes thought, it takes plan and time, okay? So we're going to go through how to develop a good habit, okay? Now, and I don't have it on here, set a goal first, okay? What is your goal? What do you want to do, okay? Maybe it's to read the Bible daily. Maybe it's to engage in prayer to your Lord on a daily basis, okay? Set a goal. What's that going to be? Now, experts tell us that it takes 21 days to establish a habit. They probably looked at the data, and it's data, not data. They come from the data that people on January 1st join a health club, and before 3 weeks are done, they're not going. That's probably how they get the data. I can't tell you how many times I've joined a health club and it just goes by the wayside. That's a waste of money. Okay, I think our scripture, Paul tells us about that. So anyway, but it takes 3 weeks of practice to develop a good habit. So I'm going to tell you how to develop a good habit. Now I want you to think. Don't think in your head. I hate that phrase. Where else would you think? Think of something that you want to develop as a habit. Okay? Now there's also data that I decided to not put in here about setting a proper goal. It's the SMART technique, and it's an acronym like that. Okay? What do you want to do to help develop a good habit to help you on your Christian walk? Okay? Now think about that. You have your homework now. Now, one particular guy, there's all kinds of different ones out there, but this one particular guy I looked at, he said there's 7 steps to developing a new habit. So you got work to do. Now, first, make a decision. Decide clearly what you're going to begin acting in a specific way 100% of the time. Okay? Maybe it's a bad habit that you want to quit, and you're going to start a habit of not doing that habit. Okay? Step number 2, never allow an exception to your new habit. Okay? Don't make excuses or rationalizations. Don't let yourself off the hook. Okay? So let's say that your habit is going to be reading the Bible at night. okay, before you go to bed, okay? You should have a specific time, and you should write your goals down, by the way. Specific time, and you go, oh man, I really had a rough day. I don't feel like doing it tonight. Don't let yourself out, because once you've missed it, it's easier to miss the next time. Just like it's been said, like if, it's like somebody says, okay, well, I don't really feel like going to evening worship. Okay, so the next Sunday, it's easier to miss the Sunday evening worship. And then again, and then again, and again. And then might even precipitate into missing Sunday service. And then you're not going at all. So it's a slippery slope, as they say. Now, tell others about practicing a new behavior. Okay, this gives you accountability. This provides accountability and increases one's discipline and determination to determine the habit when you know others are looking to see if you will continue or quit. A lot of times, using the example of working out or going to the gym, people do that. Or, maybe it's losing weight, or something like training for the marathon like Jeannie's doing. It's a joke. But give yourself accountability, okay? Don't do it in secret. Visualize your new habit, okay? And the explanation of this is, the more often you visualize and imagine yourself acting as if you had already had the new habit, the more rapidly this behavior will be accepted in your subconscious and become automatic. That sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But basically, visualize yourself as reading the Bible every night before bedtime, okay? Or engaging on your knees in prayer to God first thing in the morning when you get up. Create an affirmation. Is when you repeat over and over to yourself, the repetition dramatically increases the speed at which you develop the new habit. Okay? So we're wanting to do something to help our walk, Christian walk of life. Read the Bible more, pray more, talk to people. Maybe say, okay, every day I'm going to talk to somebody, some new person about Jesus. Okay? And you just say, I can see myself doing it. Resolve to persist. That is pretty self-explanatory. Persist in the new behavior until it becomes automatic and easy for you to actually feel uncomfortable when you do not do it and have decided what you've decided to do. I can't imagine not getting up and going to Sunday morning worship. It would feel so uncomfortable. I was raised in the church. It's, become, yes, it's a habit because I want to do it, but it's not this rote, okay? And finally, reward yourself. Makes sense. Give yourself a reward of some kind to keeping and practicing the new behavior. When I was in the Army, and I decided that maybe I'd try that college thing after all. I was going to community college, taking classes, and I decided that every time I got an A on a test, I would reward myself by getting 2 jelly donuts and chocolate milk. So to me, that was a reward. Probably didn't need to, but I was young then, and you could eat anything you want and still not gain any weight. I hate that. But that was my particular reward. Now, your reward can't be a bad habit, okay? Because then you're kind of going back, okay? So what we want to do here is a little bit different sermon, is try to improve yourself. Continuous improvement. I've been in the professional world for a long time, and they get these buzzwords. They like these buzzwords. I hate buzzwords and phrases. But continuous improvement is one that we can all do. You can never be perfect like Jesus. We want to. We can always do better. We can always do, I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. And then you accomplish that. It's like, you know what, I'm going to do it 2 times next year. Or whatever. You can always get better. Okay, so that's the purpose of this sermon, is to help us along the way to get better. Don't get comfortable in your mediocrity, basically, okay? Remember what John said about one of the churches in Revelation. God spewed them out of his mouth because they were lukewarm. We don't want to become lukewarm. All right, so we'll wrap this thing up here. So in conclusion, humans, it's been said, humans are a creature of habit. Okay? Do you want good habits? Do you want bad habits? Okay, if you have a bad habit, create a new habit to get rid of that habit. Okay? And try to improve yourself in some way. And I'm not saying go run a marathon. I don't really care. Okay? What's our ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to get to heaven, right? Do your best and then better that best. Okay? Habits can be good and bad. We've talked about that, and that's obviously. Bad habits should be broken. Okay? Good habits should be set and continued. Do you have a habit that you wish you could break? Is there a habit you wish you could start? In either case, go to God in prayer. Go to God in prayer and say, give me the strength to do this. Maybe you've been doing something that's kind of a bad habit for years. It can be broken. Okay? It's harder when you've been doing it for a long time, but it can be broken. Do you have a habit that you should start? Maybe you're an introvert. It's like, man, I really don't feel comfortable with talking with people. Okay? You don't have to, shave your head and Hare Krishna type of thing and go to the airport. Just talk to somebody and just mention Jesus in it. You don't have to, be a weirdo construed by them. Okay? And the very best habit we could have is being a faithful child of God. Absolutely. Being a faithful child of God. That's ultimate. Okay? It doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, even though it's getting less. It doesn't matter, what you have. You have a prestigious job or you dig ditches. Okay? We're all should have a goal of getting to heaven. And to do that, you have to have a habit of being a faithful child of God. Now, if somebody's in the audience right now and has not accepted Jesus, you're not a child of God. Period. If you walk out of here today and a truck hits you, your fate's sealed. I was talking to via text, the guy I work with. He said yesterday he was sitting in a emergency room in Chicago. He lives up in the region. I said, what happened? He said his wife's aunt was in a car of 4 people after midnight. Nothing good happens after midnight. And they were 4 houses down from where they left. And some knucklehead on a motorcycle was going 100 miles an hour in the neighborhood, ran into the back of them, and they took her off life support yesterday. Just like that. Our life can be snuffed out just like that. Do you really want to gamble with your eternal salvation? We're not guaranteed tomorrow, folks. I'm pretty doggone sure that she didn't think she was going to be pulled off life support that night, the next day. Okay? If you're not a child of God, why are you waiting? What are you doing? Okay? If you were a child of God and you've slipped back into the world, now is the time to get yourself right. Okay? Please, whatever your need is, I would please ask you would make it known as together we stand and sing.